Okay, good afternoon from Southwest Michigan. We're really excited to have everybody join us again for our monthly Lunch and Learn series. As always, anytime we get an opportunity to partner with Hawk Mountain, we take it up. And that's an example that you're going to be a part of today. So we're excited to have Bracken Brown with us, who's got a very interesting topic related to vulture research that he and his team are doing. So before I get too far along, again, my name is Josh Haas. I'm the vice chair for the Hawk Migration Association of North America. I'm also joined by the chair of the board, Rich Conroy, who's sitting in for the famed Julie Brown today while she's taking some much needed vacation. As a reminder, we're doing this 100% virtually through both Zoom as well as live streamed through Facebook. If you haven't noticed already, we're recording the event so that we can post it to the HMANA.org website later on. Please take note that you don't have the ability to unmute yourself. That is on purpose. You do have, however, the ability to pop open your chat and chat with us. Please tell us where you're signing in from or where your closest Hawkwatch might be. But more importantly, be prepared to ask your questions via the chat. That's the only way you can get questions across. We have Rich, who will be monitoring that chat and taking note of all your questions. And at the end of Bracken's talk, he'll go ahead and ask Bracken those questions to get that question and answer time and some dialogue going. So please don't hesitate, use that chat and engage with us. We really rely on it. Just in terms of some administrative things, especially with Zoom, as you can see, we're sharing screens as normal. Please, if you don't like the look of what you're seeing, in the upper right hand corner, you'll see a little view button, and you can change the view and customize it to how you'd like it to look. Also, if you aren't already aware, your chat button should be at the bottom of your screen. It's a little button that you can click and the chat window will pop open for you. So with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day, Bracken Brown. Bracken grew up in the viewshed of Hawk Mountain's North Lookout, where a passion for birds and a transmittered American kestrel got him volunteering with Hawk Mountain at, would you believe it, the age of 6. Working a suite of field jobs in a multitude of flyways over the years often featured raptors and often found him volunteering back at Hawk Mountain between field positions. Bracken can be found supporting Hawk Mountain's ongoing research as biologist naturalist for the sanctuary and continuing to devote time towards raptor outreach on the Lookout Rocks. So Bracken, I'll turn things over to you to get us started.
Hey, thank you so much, Josh, and welcome everyone. It is a huge pleasure to be featured at one of HMANA's Lunch and Learns. We always love to participate in these collaborative efforts. And as with all things in wildlife, it truly does take a village. So collaborating and just getting your information out there for people to pick up on and potentially partner with in the future is a huge asset to us. And hopefully you'll enjoy the following talk. This is a subject that's definitely near and dear to me, New World Vulture project. I began helping out with Hawk Mountain's vulture research in 2010. And this picture is actually a look at our local roost right now. I snapped this on the way to work. So this time of year, vultures are beginning to move back north as that snow line recedes, though we have wintering populations of vultures spread out well into New York and New England areas, as you'll pick up on later in the talk. But this is courtship time, so it's a great time to get out at the roost. You'll see a lot of birds interacting, socializing, and potentially looking for future nest sites. So great time of year to be out there talking vulture. Now you might wonder why, sorry, get this progression going. Why study vultures, especially the New World vultures? We are fortunate in that they are relatively common. Who doesn't know what a turkey vulture looks like? You can step out into your backyard anywhere in the lower 48 and lower Canada and expect to see turkey vultures passing over. But there's a lot we don't understand about them, and they play a huge role as far as the ecological services that they provide us. So as a scavenger, they're obligate scavengers. They rely on dead animals to survive. So they're essential in cleaning up our ecosystem and exposing carcasses to solar radiation to help kill off bacteria and diseases. And we're also interested in what's determining the population drivers and distributions for the populations across these areas. These vultures occupy massive home ranges. So understanding what subsets of the population are doing annually will better allow us to manage that population going forward. And there's always the conservation concern. There's always the heavy hitters of the old world vultures, especially in India and Africa, that saw those over 90% population collapses in the late 90s and early 2000s. So we always need to keep in the back of our head that as a scavenger, they really are the cleanup crew, but anything that gets out into the ecosystem, including poisons and dangerous hazardous material, is probably going to be ingested, and that makes them a higher risk for rapid population decline. So while we're currently boasting expanding New World vulture populations for turkey and black, we always have to keep that in the back of our head that they potentially could shift on a dime and suddenly see a rapid contraction in population. And interestingly enough, while we have a general understanding of survivorship, mortality, movement data for a lot of our species, vultures miss the curve on this. The main reason is they like to assist thermoregulation by urohydrosis, which is defecating onto their legs to promote evaporative cooling. So in the 1960s, roughly, most people weren't putting leg bands on vultures because then the poop would cake on it, it would rot off, or potentially put the vulture at risk for infection and losing that foot. So there was a ban on putting leg bands on them. So until relatively recently, when we began putting out patagial tags, you weren't marking the individual, and that allows you to track and understand how these species integrate with their ecosystem. We do have an age record for both species. I think black vulture is about 25 years old, and that was from a bird that was banded, I believe, in the 1930s. I may be wrong on that. So early on in the banding sequence. But we don't know, have a great understanding for survivorship, mortality, their basic breeding biology, what habitat they're relying on, how do they migrate, and are they using different migratory strategies across the population. And we always have to commend our founder, Rosalie Edge, who famously is quoted as the time to protect species is while it is still common. So we have the advantage here. Hawk Mountain is definitely beginning research on turkey vultures and black vultures while they're still common, and we're hoping to continue to grow that database moving forward to allow both of these species to continue to flourish. I'm going to get into some key terms. There's some confusion. People always see a group of vultures on the ground and assume they're eating roadkill or something's died, especially if you walk out of your house and look up and the ridge pole is covered in vultures. A lot of people tend to look at that as, do they know something I don't? So there's a lot of negative PR with a group of vultures. We can use these terms. Wake is when it's an active feeding group. So over there on the right, that's a group of black vultures that is cleaning up after birth for cattle that just gave birth. Kettle is, as we're familiar with, a group of birds circling up thermaling. Defining between what is just your local birds hanging out and what is a migratory group coming through can be a challenge. We'll get into gleaning that out in a little bit here. And finally, a committee is when it's a flock of birds just socializing either at the roost or at a post-roost hangout spot, but they're not actively feeding. Now, there are chances for these terms to get confusing, especially when that committee is holding court in the graveyard. I'm happy to report that this is not a wake. A grave wasn't seeping, but this graveyard is on a southern exposure slope. So these gravestones, as you can see, make phenomenal vulture perches when they're waiting for thermals to develop. So I got quite a few calls on that one as far as whether the graves were leaking or not. Our two species that we're currently studying with our New World Vulture project is the black vulture up here on the top. Jet black plumage, they have that white palm on the underside of their wing that they reveal as they're flying, short-tailed. These are highly gregarious birds that like to hang out in groups. You rarely ever see a single black vulture. It's typically in a group of 2 to 4 and can range up to several hundred depending where you are with them. There's an estimated about 20 million black vultures spread throughout their range, which over there on the right shows you goes from southern Argentina, Chile, all the way up into the northeast. Interestingly enough, this is, you'll notice it's all purple. They're classified as a non-migratory species. So they don't change the habitat they use between their summer and winter and breeding season. And also they're quoted as having a rapid range expansion. But if you look back in the records, for example, Massachusetts has a record of in the early 1800s, someone shot a black vulture along the coast there. So I hesitate to say they're expanding their range necessarily. It's more of a recolonizing event, probably after DDT and the public's fear of them spreading disease caused anti-vulture movement back in the mid-1900s, resulting in a range contraction. For the turkey vulture down below, we know this guy, a nice brownish overall cast to the feathers. They have that silver lining on the trailing edge of their wings. And they're a fascinating species. Between the 6 recognized subspecies, we have complete migrants, we have partial migrants, and we have non-migratory populations spread throughout. So these strategies are hard to tease out sometimes, and we'll get into how we discovered each of these successful strategies in a moment. When you compare them side to side, we know turkey vultures down here on the left have that extensive silver gray in all of the flight feathers, whereas the black vulture on the right just has it out there in the palm. Turkey vultures have that really efficient soaring flight, so they have that rocking motion that is really easy to pick up. They hold their wings in that slight upward V. So you see that dihedral rocking as they forage, often at low altitude. They have that strong sense of smell, so they can efficiently take advantage of micro updrafts as they forage for food right over treetop level. Black vultures, on the other hand, they sit a little heavier on their wing loading, so they have a stiffer flight. They have a much flatter profile, interspersed periodically with rapid wing beats. And you'll see they have quite a short tail. So this one is great at the hawk watch for throwing a distant eagle impression as they're streaming down the ridge potentially, and can keep you guessing. But that's the beauty of hawk watching, is you never know what you're gonna get. So it's always worth looking at everything. A big difference, a lot of people see vultures when they're either down on the roost or when they're feeding, and turkey vultures and black vultures never should be lumped together as far as close cousins, so to speak. If you look at this video, this is turkey vultures. They think for themselves a little more when it comes to feeding. So you have the most dominant bird actively eating, and then you'll have the range of pecking order essentially waiting their turn. So it's quite orderly around the feeding site when you get a bunch of turkey vultures. And they definitely are a species that relies on sharing information. So they still hit the communal roost, but they're not going to be foraging together as a group as much unless they have a known carcass that they're heading to. So typically turkey vultures, you have this nice quiet, I'd say orderly mealtime. Whereas black vultures with their narrow heads, long bills, they really are built to take advantage of the smallest scrap of food up to a large carcass. And when I say large carcass, they like to forage in groups. So watch this group. If you follow my mouse over here on the right-hand side, there's a piece of meat in there. And as soon as the birds begin pulling on it, that initiates a feeding frenzy of sorts between the other black vultures. So while they do definitely have pecking order going on, it is much more of a feeding frenzy, free-for-all in the midst. And this can rapidly strip, even a deer carcass can disappear in a day's time if you have a roost this size working on it. So very effective scavengers. And they're actually working with each other because as they tug in opposite directions, that allows them to tear pieces of meat more efficiently off the carcass. And it's also a great boon for getting the sun in where a rotting carcass might build up bacteria cultures that can infect future animals. This shreds it, spreads it around, and opens up the area so you don't have a contamination zone. So black vultures around here are attributed with pushing turkey vultures out of the area. This comes from sort of a twofold fact. They have a very aggressive feeding strategy. So turkey vultures don't tend to hang around when black vultures are in a group with them. But also black vultures are much more comfortable hanging around humans. So they tend to spend a lot of time just loafing in our area. So the locals tend to see more black vultures than turkey vultures. So when it comes down to how do vultures move and where do they move, we have always focused on taking a broad approach to gathering this data because a lot of people fall subject to, you have your study area, your study species, you get to know them intimately within your setting, but that doesn't necessarily account for the entire calendar year of where that bird is going to be. So we've always relied on counts at migration watch sites, taking roadside surveys, and then using satellite telemetry and more recently wing tagging to track individuals as they move throughout the landscape. So if we look at raptor population index trends, this is for fall migration of black vultures. We see not a lot's changing. We have increasing going up into New York and Connecticut area. Hawk Mountain has actually seen a downtrend in the last 10 years of the number of black vultures coming past the sanctuary. So if we take a little closer look, this is for Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's fall black vulture trends. We had the population move in the early 80s, 90s. We began seeing black vultures relatively reliably in the valley, at least during the summertime. We had this crest in the population trend a little after 2010, and then we've actually been falling off since then on our fall migration counts. And there's a lot of ways you could take this. We definitely haven't seen a drop off in the number of black vultures hanging out at our local roosts in the area. So this is something to keep in mind of the power of a count site versus local counts surveys for the area. If we compare this to a little further north, Quaker Ridge up there in Connecticut, they're still on an increasing trend for the number of black vultures they count per season. Not great in the number of black vultures, but they're steadily increasing. So we'll see what they do moving forward. Road surveys, we established 22 regional road surveys. This is covering the turkey vultures population. And the nice thing about doing a scavenger survey is you can count any of the raptors you interact with, but our focus is the New World vulture species. So we established these 22 sites to intersect with the breadth of turkey vulture home range. To date, we've completed 2 rounds on all of the green circles, and then the red are either partially completed or set to be completed next. So we're about to finish our 10-year second round of surveys. And this will allow us to look at what the population trends are doing within the region during the non-migratory period. So migration count lets you know how many birds are moving through the area. These road surveys are looking at breeding population and the wintering population. How dense are the vultures in that region? And that can show seasonal trends. So for example, Panama is one of our counts. We have these 6 survey routes spread throughout, and you want the route to cover a decent amount of area within the target region. And you don't want it to be just through a heavily forested area. You want to be able to see the birds, so you set them up to take advantage of farmland, open areas, going down valleys is a popular one. So in 2005, Panama surveys were initiated. You can see this is near the equator. This is the black vulture stronghold. Remember, there's 20 million estimated, and we only have, I think it's estimated that 2% of that is in North America. So we have astonishing numbers of over 400 vultures per 100 kilometers in the summer, and then in the wintertime, that actually jumped up to over 650 black vultures. Red is turkey vultures, and this is a wintering area for birds coming out of North America. So we see a population increase into the winter from the summer time. We repeated these surveys in 2019, finishing them up in 2020. And surprisingly enough, we saw a huge drop in the number of black vultures visiting the area, which should be, remember, they're a non-migratory, so you should have a static, relatively static population in the area, but turkey vultures still showed a similar trend with less birds in the summer, more birds coming down and supplementing that population in the winter. So this is an area that now we're curious what's going on with the black vultures. We'll analyze the nearby survey regions in Costa Rica to see if they're showing a similar trend and maybe kickstart some research down in that area. Our next site we'll visit is South Carolina. This is well-known wintering area for turkey vultures on the Eastern Flyway here. So back in 2005, we had our summer and winter routes performed. Dramatic increase in the number of turkey vultures wintering in the area. Black vultures stayed roughly the same. When we repeated the survey, we saw there was a dramatic population increase overall, with close to doubling or over doubling the number of birds seen for both winter and summer, but we still have that seasonal pattern of migratory turkey vultures coming down to spend the winter in the region, and relatively static black vulture population. And then our final example for road surveys is checking in with our Pennsylvania to New York survey. It's a 2 route that just runs up south of the Great Lake, around the Finger Lakes region, and ends in Ithaca. So when we did this back in 2005, we only had turkey vultures in the summer at about 10 per 100 kilometers. When we revisited it, most notably, we had a huge increase in the number of turkey vultures seen for the summer, but black vultures did appear. And now we have wintering birds up in there. So road surveys are an effective means for monitoring in general what the population trends are doing, because we have the Christmas bird count data, breeding bird surveys are showing increases. We want to make sure that road surveys are going to be an effective tool to capture shifting trends as we move forward. Now, for the rest of our study techniques, that requires you to get hands on the bird. So as promised, there is going to be some roadkill. You have to choose your bait wisely here. We do 2 methods for trapping adult vultures. We either do the leg loops for a noose carpet that we stake out around the bait. That's up there on the right. You'll see there's the monofilament fishing line noose attached to a parachute cord. Vulture steps into them. it tightens on the leg, we can go and retrieve the vulture. Interestingly enough, I've spent more hours than I care to admit watching turkey vultures carefully step around the nooses, get up and feed, and you're not going to catch a bird until you get a second vulture coming in, and then they argue over who's going to be standing on the carcass, and that's often when one gets pushed into the nooses. So it's always somewhat frustrating when that dominant bird comes in first, and you know you're going to have to wait a while to hopefully trap something. Other method is just the walk-in trap over here on the right. The nice thing about this is you can catch a feeding group of vultures, so you'll get more samples over the course of one trapping period. And especially with black vultures, it's always nice for additional group association. If you're putting out patagial tags, you can see, do those tags stick together moving forward, or was it adventitious foraging behavior that brought them into the carcass bait? Turkey vultures, remember, are the ones with the strong sense of smell. My preferred bait is actually a stillborn piglet because it's very soft tissue. The birds have no problem breaking through the skin, and it's also highly fragrant, so the vultures know when I put bait out. I will say fastest return on bait was actually white-tailed deer fawn. Slowest return, sheep, doesn't generally do well when vultures have a lot of options. So you have to be intelligent about how you're baiting or setting the scene to try to get some birds in. But once they know about it and you pre-bait especially, they can be waiting for you to show up to set the trap on them. So once you get them in hand, you have to process the bird. And the problem I will say with the walk-in trap is that there's always that last vulture. These are highly intelligent birds, so they are well aware of where the entrance exit point for the trap is, and especially black vultures will watch you catch all of their flock mates out of the trap. So when you get down to the final few, oftentimes that bird's gonna never turn its back to you and sort of jump into the netting but come out facing you because it knows how you're trying to grab it. So they always keep you on your toes, but once you get it in hand, you can take all the morphometric measurements you want. Here's the mailbox with the side cut out. This is a phenomenal tool for taking blood samples as well as putting on patagial tags, because it allows two researchers to work together, whereas it would be free holding a bird, putting a patagial tag on would get pretty exciting. Once you get your measurements, you set the vulture down, and oftentimes it's a relatively leisurely departure up here on the left. This is senior researcher David Barber. We were working out in the field. Black vultures, they have a group in the trap. They'll often just sort of walk off, check out their new tag before leaving the area. One of the aspects we've done is testing vultures for pollutants. So they are phenomenal bioindicators for health of the region because they are ingesting everything. So if you look at what's in the vulture's blood or potentially in the pellets they cast up, you get an idea of what they're consuming and what's available in the surrounding ecosystem. The downside to this is establishing how big of an area that vulture is truly using. So we know, for example, our turkey vultures often have multiple communal roosts that they'll routinely visit that can span several hundred miles potentially. Black vultures tend to be a little more sedentary than turkey vultures, but they still will often have a couple roosts that they visit. So determining the size of the area that they truly represent can be a bit of a gamble. To date, we have deployed 82 transmitters on turkey vultures. I believe 13 of which are still active. They're a phenomenal candidate for these new solar panel transmitters because as the vulture spreads its wings and faces the sun in the morning, that is perfect activity for charging those units up. So a lot of our cost goes towards maintaining these units that have been on a Vulture for quite a few years. I think our longest one was 11 years that a unit was functional on a turkey Vulture. But you can see here that we've covered a lot of the geographic distribution for turkey vultures. We found that for our West Coast birds, all of these northern ones are obligate migrants moving down into Central and South America, there we go. For the wintering time, East Coast turkey vultures are partially migrants. Roughly half of our birds chose to migrate south in the winter. The other half didn't actually change their home range that much. And then when we go down into Argentina, they have the opposite. So they migrate north for their winter and then reestablish themselves on their summer home range. There's a lot of site fidelity in the migratory population as far as their wintering area and summering area, whereas the partial migrants, not surprisingly, maybe have a high degree of variability in where they'll winter from year to year, but they generally do come back to the same summering area. We've put out 11 transmitters on black vultures, and all of our data has supported the non-migratory status. So this is a typical seasonal movement. This was Gifford, tag number 272. And you can see that during the wintering period, it did do this southern sort of meander, a couple counties down south, spent some time, but did ultimately come back up to the home range. And there's actually a tighter home range during the winter than the summer months. If we look at Gifford for the next winter, it's pretty much the same summering area, but even a tighter winter range with no southward wandering. So these birds have a really tight home range. Most of our transmitters have been on Pennsylvania birds. So now we're looking to expand that. And as such, last summer, we deployed this transmitter on a nestling black vulture up on Mount Toccoa in Massachusetts. So you can see this is our typical unit where you have the solar panel that sticks out of the back feathers on the bird, short antenna. And we also put the patagial tag so you can visually document the individual from a distance. This has been really useful with birds that have had transmitters that go offline. You can often see the tag afterwards to document, well, it wasn't a mortality event and those sorts of things. So you can see for the track here, it's a little wider of a home range. This is just this bird's first 6 months of life. So it's figuring itself out. It's estimated that black vultures don't breed until the second year, but that isn't completely documented yet. So we'll hopefully be able to document that with this transmitted individual. The black star up top is where the bird's nest location was. You can see it has spent the majority of its time. It's still up there at the moment. Near the nest site, visiting some composting plants. And then it's begun, it was about 2 months in, it began making these tracks down into Connecticut. The focal region of those tracks are actually an open air pig breeding facility. So there's a lot of attractants for black vulture there. So it has made this commute quite frequently in its young life. And then in the middle of the winter, we got excited hoping it was an active migration. It came down here to New Haven, Connecticut, spent about 2 days there, and then turned around and made the trip right back up north to the natal region. So this bird is showing a slightly different use of the surrounding ecosystem up there in Massachusetts and Connecticut. And we're hoping to put another transmitter out somewhere in the New England population coming up soon. Downside with transmitters is just the upfront cost of getting the unit and then taking out a service plan for said unit. So a nice alternative is putting out wing tags or patagial tags. These are modified cattle ear tags that are clipped on the front of the bird, leading edge of the bird's wing, sort of off of the elbow joint. So it's a nice thin flap of skin there. You can safely place a tag where it's not going to interrupt with blood vessels or any of the major ligaments going through. And this allows you to visually track the bird. Wing tags are phenomenal because you can re-encounter the bird as it's going about its daily life. If you look at banding data for a similar sized raptor, let's take golden eagles, you get a 3% roughly chance of re-encountering a bird you banded. And that's typically through a mortality event. So someone picks up the carcass, you know where the bird ended up. Beautiful thing about patagial tags is anyone driving around can see the tag, get the number, and report it, and you actually have a track built for that individual as it goes about its daily life. So this is a phenomenal asset to build a database. So it's not going to be as high of frequency as the transmitter data, but we wanted to see, does it allow us to keep track of the birds to a similar degree. So since 2008, when we began putting out patagial tags, we've had 1,489 resightings, 369 of which were turkey vultures, over 1,000 of which were black vultures. You can see the pale blue dots are turkey vultures. We do have tag re-encounters from the breadth and sweep of the home range that we know they use via our transmitter data. And then the black vultures are showing a much similar, tighter knit cluster around our trapping sites here. So patagial tags cost about $3 to $5, depending what design you go with. So this is really a cost-effective way of tracking the individual. And interestingly enough, we've had it out on our population long enough that we could look at some survival statistics. So some preliminary results from our resighting. Notice that while we've had 64% of the turkey vultures check back in, we didn't have enough data to actually look at a survival analysis. So for the black vultures, which 77% of them check back in through citizen scientists, we have a 77% survival rate for those hatchier individuals, and that jumps up to an 87% survival rate for the adults. So these are long-lived, efficient, smart scavengers that can, if they reach that adulthood or fledgling state, be in our ecosystem for a long period of time, which can lead to quite a few problems. The majority of my calls in the past year have been issues with black vultures. Some people have supported calling them near human commensal species because they do associate so much with human activity. They definitely are equipped to take advantage of any potential food resource, and they are watching what we're doing. Problem with black vultures is, well, not a problem, but they're very effective at identifying where potential food sources are and making sure to check back in. So things like carcass dump sites, whether it's the DOT dumping carcasses off the highway, farmers, carcass pits, they know about those points and they'll check back in. So you can expect the same vultures to show up to the carcass when food's available, and that's going to attract more. So you build into the problems. A more recent call I've been getting is black vultures on people's front porches, eating the cat food. One person wasn't going to stop putting cat food outside. And so I said, well, you can move it somewhere the vultures can't get at it. So she moved it to a shed with a cat door. The vultures watched her walk the cat food into the cat shed, and a day later they were squeezing through the cat door to keep eating with the cat. So they're really intelligent. and quite comfortable around people, which unnerves a lot and leads to all sorts of exciting newspaper headlines of massive vultures terrorizing towns, or pooping and puking to interrupt radio transmissions. And a lot of this is preventable. We often choose very similar habitat to what vultures like. So whether it's planting mature stands of pine trees as a wind block on our property, those mature into phenomenal winter roost sites for vultures. Or if it's trash or feeding pets or other animals outside, agricultural practices, all of these trigger the innate foraging behavior of black vultures to come in and at least check it out. If they're successful, they're going to keep coming back. And that can often perpetuate into a problem area where a farmer is calling on the USDA to depredate vulture roost on their area. So I would say issues with black vultures has bunched into roost issues with birds hanging around houses, downtown areas. People don't like the added guano to the area. And then agriculture or other communication technology. Boat ramps are another one. Vultures like to hang out around water. They're really clean birds. They bathe quite frequently. So a lot of our boat ramps, you have fishermen. I had a fisherman complaining about black vultures as he was getting the fish into the water right there. So those sorts of things are something that people aren't necessarily thinking about, but should be as far as why the vultures are showing up. And primary dangers to black vultures once they fledge, you're looking at vehicle strikes and collisions as the #1 issue. They are slow to get off the road. So if someone doesn't brake for them, often they'll have a vulture pinging off the windshield. And then just roosting at communication towers or electro-generating plants for warmth in the winter, that can cause subsequent issues there. So a lot of their mortality events have some aspect of human associated risk with them. So to get around the continuing bad PR for vultures, there have been a couple documents looking at educating the public, just getting them familiar with what are the social cues and triggers for black vultures. Hawk Mountain has put out a couple get to know the black vulture pamphlets that we have links to. I'm happy to share that with you all. You can reach out to me and I'll link you to our PDFs, or you can find it at our New World Vulture research page online. So they just generally focus on what are the key characteristics of black vultures, what are some of the social cues, and what can you do to maintain a healthy property line between you and the vultures. If you want to become a further member of the team, we are always looking for support. All of these aspects take quite a bit of finances to pull off. So this is a new pamphlet that will be hitting the bookstore and hopefully Hawk Watches near you, where you can adopt a vulture. At some of the levels, it will include a trip out into the field with me or David for a tagging event or trapping event. So you can get to learn these phenomenal species a little better. So feel free to reach out if you want to support us or support us through reporting a tagged bird. We have an online report form that can be found at our website. Just fill out the data so we can continue to grow our database and track our birds across the East Coast. And finally, I always want to put a plug, come out and work with us. We have an excellent trainee program here, and we have used it to build our contacts. Say most of our international as well as our local 50 state road surveys have been done by either former trainees or someone associated with the trainee group. So fill out an application form. I think we're pretty much booked for the coming year, but always get your name in there or find a way to swing by the rocks and talk vulture. I'm always happy to do that. So next steps for us here in general, we'll continue to deploy wing tags on nestlings as well as adult birds, monitor the nest success, and get our target right now is deploying transmitters up in New England at that northern edge of the black vultures range, hoping to capture some of those migratory birds, because you do see, if you look on eBird, range restriction going into winter. There definitely are birds that will winter as far north as Vermont, but a significant portion of those birds vacate the area. So we would like to get transmitters out on some of these individuals that are moving around a little more than our local black vultures, to hopefully understand how they're expanding their range to reclaim their historic distribution. And then we're close to finishing up our regional road surveys, and hopefully we're going to grow our collaboration list and maybe expand the number of road surveys we are through people adopting and undertaking road surveys in their area. And then the final one is continue to mitigate that growing black vulture human tension. There have been pushes by several states to allow for the legal take of black vultures. Unfortunately, that tends to target not the problem birds, but your local birds, and people aren't actually addressing the lure that is bringing black vultures into their area. So that wouldn't be a successful way to go about mitigating these issues. Thank you all so much for listening, and I believe now is the time for questions. I'll leave my contact information up there. Hope you learned a little more about what we're doing to keep on the forefront of New World vulture research, and I look forward to getting some updates going forward here.
Well, thank you so much, Bracken. What a wonderful presentation. I just can't believe I had so many questions halfway through, and you answered all of them as you went. So we do have several questions that have come in, though, and so I'd like to turn it over to my partner in crime here, Rich. Go ahead and start facilitating some questions for us.
All right. Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you, Bracken, for a wonderful presentation on birds that are around us all the time. If you're in this area, you know, I'm in Philadelphia, so, you know, a day without seeing a vulture is really not something that happens anymore around here. So the first question we have, Bracken, is Hawk Mountain the only vulture tagging operation on the East Coast?
No, that's an excellent question. Our vulture database recently has had quite a few submissions for lime green tags. That is a US Department of Agriculture project out of Hershey, Pennsylvania, is deploying lime green. I think they're 3-digit, 2 numeric, 1 alpha codes, and they're a double tag on the wing. There's red tags that the USDA put out in West Virginia, and I think in Florida they have a stiff yellow wing tag project going on. So we're definitely not the only people tagging vultures, which means definitely note the tag color as well as the combination before submitting your reports.
All right, thank you for that answer, Bracken. Next question would be, are there any routes in the Intermountain West? And I guess that would be in reference to the regional road surveys.
So right now, that is a gap in our knowledge. We have some friends who at Raptor View Research Institute, they have close to 40 transmitters now. I think they're on par to have 40 transmitter turkey vultures that they're doing tracks on, but that's an area I would like to add road surveys to. So if someone's out there willing to do some road survey work, get in touch with me. I look forward to talking it.
Oh, great answer. That's a great way to get folks out doing the research that you're currently doing. All right, here we have one. What attracts black vultures to the rubber parts around car windshields?
That is an excellent question, and one that has had quite a few theories from the birds are exercising their muscles. It's a textural thing. We know they don't have a strong sense of smell, so there's not that scent attractant pulling them in. But we don't have a great answer for why they target the rubber. It's probably a case of the birds are sitting on the vehicle, and that's an easy point of access. So ultimately, the rubber bears the brunt of their activity there.
Thank you, Bracken. Here we go. We have a question about in 2021, the Indiana Farm Bureau is granting permits to take up to 3 black vultures because they find they're killing and eating live farm animals. It's also enforced in other states in the Midwest. Not sure if this permitting is daily or annually. Do you think this allowance will have an effect on populations?
That's a great question. So it all comes down to the number of requests per region, which I believe the USDA is tracking very closely. My main issue with this is there are documented cases, absolutely, of black vultures attacking freshly born livestock. But oftentimes that is sort of a result of the scene being set for them. So a lot of livestock operations are open air. The cow gives birth in the field, same with sheep. They have a carcass dump for anyone that doesn't make it off the field after birth is a huge attractant for vultures coming in. So the birds are attracted to the area. And then there's limited resource. So when you build up to where you have several hundred black vultures competing for a limited resource, that's often where you end up with them attacking a freshly born animal. So it is a risk. I'm not super happy that they're already in the take process for landowners. I think there needs to be a little more information ahead of people going out and selecting which 3.
All right. Thank you, Bracken. So then we have a couple of questions that I can kind of combine. One of them is, where do turkey vultures nest? And then I would add to that, what is your strategy for finding and monitoring nests?
Excellent question. So both species of vultures like cave-like nesting cavities typically. So a natural cavity would be either a crevice or hole into a cliff face or boulder field. They'll nest in hollow trees. I've even seen turkey vultures nesting in thick multiflora rose bushes where they sort of burrow in to the base of the bush. But both species will take advantage of abandoned outbuildings or barns, and they'll move in through a window and set up shop. So we've been monitoring black vulture and turkey vulture nest success in the area. We found that of our natural cavity, they have over a 50% more fail event. And then for the man-made, those have close to or over an 80% nest success rate. So the birds that are using human buildings are actually having better luck. To find the nest, you have to spend a lot of time watching the vultures. So now's the time when they begin scouting out potential nest sites. So you'll see birds hanging out on the roof of buildings or on a rock face. They might disappear down into the rocks. You can wait a little bit and then climb out and see if a bird comes out. Or if you wait you'd wait 70 or so days after suspected laying, oftentimes the young will be hissing and eventually you'll get that smell. So a lot of groundwork looking for vultures coming off of suspected nest areas, and then people calling and reporting birds in their outbuildings has been our best success.
Thank you, Bracken. There's a question that says, are you frequently finding lead levels in blood samples?
Yes. So when we were taking blood and testing it for lead, this was I think we wrapped that up in 2012, we were finding everything from subclinical levels to clinical levels of lead concentration, and that was mainly based on presumably what the bird had been eating. Nestlings ranged from some were clinical to a lot of them had no lead levels in the blood yet, but most of our adult black vultures had some level of lead present in the blood.
Thank you, Bracken. I'm trying to read some questions while you're answering, so bear with me a little bit. Thanks to
No
everybody
worries.
for all the questions that are coming in as well. So just to boil this question down a little bit, for folks who want to discourage nesting in barns or any kind of structures, are there anywhere they can get resources for that, or any recommended methods for discouraging them from nesting?
Yeah, so one of our pamphlets deals with ways of discouraging birds from setting up, and the key is do it early. You don't want the birds to be about to lay eggs before you begin trying to discourage them to the barn. Biggest thing is block access points to where the birds want to nest. Once you block that off, they're not going to be able to get in. If you increase activities and push the birds out when they're first exploring where to set up a nest, is going to be your best step to discouraging them from using your building. But yeah, early prevention and get to it before the birds have laid eggs or have young in the nest.
Brandon, I would have a second follow-up to that. Is there a resource where you can find in your area when nesting typically might begin for them, or depending on where you are?
It all depends where you are. Like I said, birds are beginning to scout nest sites where I am locally now. We've had them initiate nesting as late as June as well in this area. So it's a fairly broad window. And again, it's going to depend where in North America you are.
Yep, good answer. But that's so just for folks to be earlier is probably better if you want to discourage, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Do vultures in a typical day cover larger areas than other birds of prey?
Oh, that's an excellent question. It depends on the species that you're dealing with. Turkey vultures tend to cover quite a large area as they're coursing, looking for potential food sites. So I would say generally, yes. Most raptors are tied to a fairly tight home range area that features where they're hunting for prey versus the nest, but that's always going to change depending what time of year it is.
Thank you. And just Josh, since I don't always do this, we are getting more questions in, but I want to be cognizant of the time as I usually am with these things. Are there ways for us to take questions that we don't get to and get some answers from Bracken for folks who ask?
We certainly can, and I think folks can see his email address on screen as well. I think, Rich, why don't you take a couple more questions and then turn it back over and I'll close.
Gotcha, okay. Here's an interesting question from a master naturalist, excuse me. They read that vultures are federally protected. Does this apply to all vulture species in 2022? And I guess for me, when I read this question, I would think back to the Michigan take permits. How does that work?
Yeah, so they are all federally protected. You can apply to U.S. Department of Agriculture's APHIS, so Animal Monitoring Service, and you have to go through an application process to get that take permit. It's not like a hunting season where you pay your due and you're issued, here's your harvest quota for the upcoming season. So it's very monitored at this point. So I would say, yes, they are all protected as with all other species, but this is a loosening of protection as far as who's able to go out and deal with problematic vulture calls. It used to be a state Department of Agriculture APHIS agent used to have to go out and do the takes.
And then just one last one that I would ask, Bracken. Thanks for answering all these. Are animal agriculture operations changing vulture behavior in terms of the occasional take of newborn livestock animals because of availability of young, weak animals versus naturally occurring scavenging opportunities?
Yes, because often animal birth outs occur during our migratory period. So you have sort of a heightened presence at the local roosts from what I've seen. And you have that pressure of this is the local food resource. They're expecting it there. And then you have struggling young with the afterbirth. And I will say, vultures are much more adept than people at identifying an animal that's on its way out. So I've had a couple calls where they say it's a vulture predation, but you show up and you have the mother wasn't giving birth, so it was a breach or the young got stuck. So that isn't going to be a vulture predation event. They were just there watching the animal struggle, and they began feeding as soon as they wanted to. So this predation aspect is a fine line, and it's a situation by situation base. So.
Thank you, Bracken. And I'm going to turn it over to Josh, but just with saying Josh's suggestion about taking advantage of Bracken's email address. If we didn't ask your question, if Bracken's accommodating to that, that would be wonderful. So if I didn't get a chance to ask your question, apologies, just keeping track of the time. Okay. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much, Rich. And especially thank you, Bracken. What a wonderful presentation. And to our constituents, just some outstanding questions today. So thank you very much for that level of engagement. Always much appreciated. We do have good plans for next month. We're excited to welcome Chris Parrish from the Peregrine Fund, who's going to talk to us about the North American non-lead program. So we're finalizing some details and getting that set up right now. I think there was at least one question related to lead today. So I think hopefully that person is interested to stick around for another month. As always, we love that we can provide these programs for you free of charge. Just remember that these programs are only made available because of your donations. So when you're considering donating to nonprofits, please keep HMANA as one of your organizations that you like to donate to. We do great work with that money and hold it very important when we do get any size donation. So thank you again to everybody for joining. Bracken especially, thank you again. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month. Everybody have a great day.